Okay, it is now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. We are so fortunate to be joined today by David Macdonald, who has been senior economist at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives since 2011. He specializes in childcare, income inequality, and federal fiscal policy. He coordinates the alternative federal budget, and conducted the childcare fee analysis that informed Canada's National Childcare Plan. He is a frequent media commentator and on economics and social policy. Please help me welcoming David.
Great. Well, thanks so much for having me. Thanks so much for the Atkinson Centre for Society and Child Development, as well as George Brown College for the invitation today. I'm not sure who invited the Economist for the first round of the day, but hopefully it'll be entertaining nonetheless. I want to draw from this presentation from two key streams of research that we've been engaged in at the CCPA. The first is the Child Care Fee Survey, which is just completed its 10th year and is becoming irrelevant, thankfully. This is something that, yes, very much, yes. Cheer for the relevance of my research. Thank you. I'm going to leave now. This has been an ongoing project with my co-author Martha Friendly, longtime childcare, much more knowledgeable childcare person than I. I'm going to be providing you with some of the preliminary details of that fee survey. None of this is published, none of it is peer-reviewed. If you claim that this is God's honest truth, I will say that you made that up. So just keep that in mind, it's not peer-reviewed. And the other thing that I'll be looking at today is one of our new projects. One of the, I think, most important projects when it comes to childcare as we move away from fees and we move towards accessibility, not just affordability, is the CCPA licensing database. We have compiled and are rapidly updating a track of all licensed childcare spaces in the country, in every single province. We are tracking them in all the centers, as well as tracking the home counts. We're doing this on a quarterly basis, and we've been doing it since 2022. We are now tracking the 1.2 million licensed spaces in Canada, across the 21,000 licensed centers in Canada, and the 20,000 licensed homes in Canada. We know for these spaces where they are by postal code, who owns them, whether they are part of a chain or not, the detailed age breakdown, whether they are part of the CWELCC system, and also what is their auspice. Are they private? Are they nonprofit? Are they operated by a school board? Are they operated by a government, like a city or a First Nations community? Or are they a co-op? Now, we are going to be drawing from that. Again, I'm going to be drawing in this presentation. This is unpublished research. This is the first time it's being shown publicly. Again, I will disavow all knowledge of this if you claim this to be the God's honest truth. That being said, it is, I think, the best picture of what has been happening with CWELCC, not only in the fees from our fee survey, but also on the space expansion since the start of 2022. It is updated through April 2025, 2 months ago. So this is extremely current knowledge, research about what is happening in terms of the expansion of CWELCC. Again, this is licensed spaces. We are basing this on the license database that the provinces provide. It is not enrollment. These are different. Enrollment is lower than licensed spaces. This is a best case scenario of what is happening, best case, because it's very rare that you're at 100% enrollment. This was due to licensing databases available from the provinces and help from very generous provincial government officials, several of whom are in the room, that have helped me put together this data set over time. We are only looking here at non-school age children. By non-school age, I mean they cannot go to public school yet because they're not old enough. And when we talk about children or child counts, we are adjusting for the fact that some provinces, like Ontario, have full-day junior kindergarten, and so they need fewer childcare spaces, in essence, because you're in the JK, when it comes to full-day spaces. So keep that in mind. Those are adjusted on a sort of provincial basis. So prior to CWELCC, what was the main complaint of parents? 1, fees are way too high. 2, wait lists are way too long. So let's look at both of those in order. Let's start with fees. This was one of the big promises of the CWELCC system, was $10 a day childcare. Where are we at today in terms of $10 a day childcare across the country? Well, I think it's important to point out that the agreements don't actually say fees will never exceed $10 a day. That is not what the CWELCC agreements say. The CWELCC agreements say that on average across all parents, the average of all fees shall be no more than $10 a day on a good day when Jupiter is in Sagittarius. So you can absolutely have a situation where some parents pay $20 a day, and other parents pay $5 a day, maybe due to some low-income subsidy, for instance, and it averages out to $10 a day, and that would absolutely lawyer your way into meeting the criteria of the CWELCC agreements. And the other piece, too, is that this hasn't happened yet. That while the commitment to $10 a day was not immediate, the commitment is around this time next year. So it's April 2026. So if you say, I'm paying more than $10 a day, you're violating the CWELCC. Well, no, they're not violating the CWELCC agreement yet. They will be at this point next year, potentially. So what is the picture as it stands today? This is really the good news story, honestly. This is an incredible change in terms of the amount that parents pay for childcare in Canada. If we take a look at we've got 6 provinces and territory that are already at $10 a day, not the lawyered $10 a day where it's average of $10 across all parents, but maximum fee of $10 a day. We're already in that situation across the board. Quebec is actually slightly below that, although they've been below it this entire time. But everybody's not at $10 a day. So this is worth pointing out. We have, we've got Alberta at 17, we've got Ontario and New Brunswick in the $20 range. The top 2 provinces here in terms of cost still at this point retain market fees, and there is a fee reduction removed from those market fees. So if we take a look at British Columbia, for instance, there's a set amount that's removed every month. They haven't moved to a set fee like is the case now in just recently in Alberta as well as just recently in Ontario. And so you actually have a range of fees that parents pay. This is based on different cities. So the $24 is the median that you would pay in Kelowna versus $39 a day, which is the median that you would pay in Richmond. And so there's a huge variety of fees that you might pay in British Columbia. Now, you might say to me, well, look, Ontario, you're dragging your feet here. Why aren't you at $10 a day? Obviously, if other provinces can do it, if Manitoba can do it or Quebec can do it, clearly you can do it. And so I would like to point out, this is the average monthly savings for an infant in various places across Canada. 2019, which is the base year of the CWELCC agreements, or 2020 in the case of Ontario, versus today, versus 2025. And you can see that the savings on a monthly basis are tremendous, particularly in Ontario because it was so expensive in Toronto. So if we take a look at Toronto itself, parents are saving $1,400 a month per child, per infant. This is infant, slightly less for older children, but this will give you some idea. Fees in Toronto used to be almost $2,000 a month. $2,000 a month, that used to be the fee in 2019. Now it's just under $500. There's a huge sea change in terms of what parents pay. Similar thing happening in other GTA cities. It wasn't quite as extreme as the city of Toronto, but still pretty extreme. You've seen savings here in the GTA cities of about $1,000. Iqaluit, also incredibly expensive. But as they move now to $10 a day, you see huge savings there in the $1,000 a month range. And places like Calgary as well, huge drops there. I mean, it used to cost $1,300 a month for an infant in Calgary. It now costs a little over $200 a month. So just a huge change in terms of the cost that parents pay. Interestingly, Quebec has actually become slightly more expensive since 2019, and this is because their fees were low and they go up with inflation. And so they're $25 more expensive. Hopefully folks in Quebec can find that $25. But I think it's worth pointing out, these savings are not quite as big for older children, toddlers or preschool age, but these are tremendous savings. The one challenge I think politically is that memories are short, right? Folks don't use childcare for 10 years. They use childcare for 4 years, and then their kids in school. Maybe they use it for 6 if they have 2 years. So it's actually going to be pretty difficult to find parents that have experienced this entire trend, that they were paying $2,000 a month in 2019 and are now paying about $500. And so this is a challenge for the CWELCC agreement, is that folks just think, oh, childcare is more affordable. That's great. It's still expensive, but it's more affordable. Now, I suspect that if you said, oh, now your childcare is going to cost $2,000 a month in Toronto, people would be upset about that. But in any event, this is a political problem, is that these fees used to be very high, but for a very short amount of time, and then parents moved on to the public education system, which is free. So, this is the first issue. Fees were high. They're much lower. Now, they're not $10 a day. I don't know if Ontario or Alberta are going to get to $10 a day. I know there are provincial officials in the room who would love to hear whether that is the goal of a maximum of $10 a day, or whether they're going to do the lawyer approach of an average of $10 a day, which they are certainly legally, they certainly could legally do. But let's move on to the second question: access. Are there enough spaces? Are people going to end up on wait lists? Now, one of the things that clearly happens when you decrease prices, people say, holy cow, childcare is affordable. I can go back to work. This is great. I'm going to put my kid in childcare. When it was $2,000 a month, heck no, it's way better for me to just stay home, right? I can't make that much a month. And so how are we doing on the spaces front? This is the graph of the combined provincial CWELCC commitments to space creation, starting in 2021 and going all the way through to 26-27. The target here is about 250,000 spaces. We're on track. We're on track, right? This is current as of April 2 months ago. This is the counts across all the provinces. We are largely on track towards the CWELCC targets. Now, I mean, the big question here is, were these good targets, or were they even consistent across different provinces? I think you'll see in the next couple slides they weren't at all. So if you say, you know, I think one of the benefits of doing the spaces like this is it's a big number, right? We're going to create 250,000 spaces. It's a big number, right? It's impressive. I think the problem is parents have become very jaded when it comes to these sort of projections. We're going to create 50,000 spaces. You're like, yeah, but I'm still on a wait list. What do I care if there's 50,000 more spaces? I can't get a space for my kid. And so if we were to say, for instance, oh, we're going to put 10,000 new spaces in, well, that would double the number of spaces in Nova Scotia, but it would do nothing for Ontario because there's so many more kids, right? And so these big numbers, I think, are very deceptive. And I think what's more useful is to look at coverage rates. So these are, you see the bar, each one of the bars here. The bottom of the bar is where each province started in terms of coverage rates. And the top of the bar is where they will hypothetically be at the end of 26-27 fiscal year if they build the number of spaces they said they were going to build. Coverage rate here means, so if you've got a 60% coverage rate, that means you have 6 spaces for every 10 children. Or so you don't necessarily want 100% coverage rates because you're going to have people staying home. Certainly in the first year, a lot of parents stay home with the kids. Even years after that, maybe one parent stays home, the child stays home. You want pretty close to 100% for public schools in terms of coverage rate, but you don't necessarily for childcare. What's interesting about the CWELCC agreements is there is actually a target in 5 of the 10 CWELCC agreements for coverage rates. It is 59%. Remember that, 59, not 60% or 66%. I'm sure there's some provincial officials here who know why it's 59%, but it is consistently 59%. I did look it up. 1959 was the year that the Avro era was canceled and Barbie was invented. So I don't know if that has anything to do with it. However, someone can tell me whether that's the case. Now, so, you know, we're thinking about 60%. How many of these provinces, if they, the other point too, I skipped the key part, is the green ball is where we are. The green ball is where we are right now, in terms of space creation and coverage rates. This adjusts for growth points and years and so on. And so at the end of this, how many provinces will be at roughly 59%? Remember, it's 59%, not 60. Many of them, actually, if they meet their targets. Now, the interesting thing about coverage rates, as I was going through this, is that coverage rates can increase 2 ways. The first way is you build spaces, right? That's one way you can increase coverage rates. The second is you decrease your child population. And you think, whoa, that's maybe not the approach we want, but it will almost certainly be what's going to happen across Canada, in particular provinces. There will be population estimates right now are that Newfoundland will have about 15% fewer non-school age children in 2027 than they do today. BC, Saskatchewan, Manitoba will have about 10% fewer non-school age children than they have today seeking childcare spaces. And so this is one of the ways you increase coverage rates is you have an aging population. Aging population, we think, oh, it's people with gray hair. Well, no, aging population means you don't have any kids anymore. And so as you cut back immigration levels and we have low fertility rates, you end up sort of, by doing nothing, you end up with better coverage rates. And so that's what we're seeing in some of these provinces. So you can see over here that Prince Edward Island and Quebec were already at 60%. This is a cottage industry in PEI. They've always had tons of space. They've had tons of spaces for decades. So the coverage rates are very high there. You can see that Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, and British Columbia, if they meet their CWELCC targets, and if their populations of non-school age children decline by 2027, they will also be close to the targets. I think what's worth pointing out here is that two of the biggest provinces, Ontario and Alberta, will be nowhere near 60%. And this is a real problem. It isn't about creating 50,000 or 100,000 or 150,000 spaces or whatever. It's about, can I find a space for my kid, right? I need to find a space. Do I have to put my kid on, wait list as soon as I get pregnant, that sort of thing? This will continue to be the case, I suspect, in Ontario and Alberta, even if they hit the targets that are built into the CWELCC agreement, which is why I think you need to be skeptical of just, we want 50,000 spaces or whatever. So even if we hit the targets in Alberta and Ontario, they may be paper victories, in essence. They may not yield, and will, I think, continue to have substantial political pressure that, spaces are a lot cheaper, but you can't get one. And that's a concern right now, and it will continue to be a concern, particularly in these provinces. In some of the other provinces, it may be less of a concern, actually, in 2 years or so. So now I want to look at where the spaces were created. 2022 through 2025, where were they created? Which auspices have been creating them? Which types of auspices have been creating them? In order to do that, though, I think we do need to take a look at what did the picture look like before the CWELCC system was implemented. What did the picture look like pre-CWELCC in 2021 in terms of auspice broken down by province? Now, by auspice here, I'm grouping several categories in terms of the private side. These are individually owned private centers as well as private chains. On the nonprofit side, it is nonprofit organizations, whether chains like, say, the YMCA or individually run by sort of a parents group of some description that's a nonprofit. In the nonprofit space, we're also including government-run centers. So this is going to be municipal as well as First Nations. School boards are included there as well as co-ops. We have all this detail, but I'm just sort of simplifying a bit here. And we also have homes. So here we're assuming these are licensed homes. We're assuming 4 non-school age children per home, the sort of 2 under 2, 2 over 2 type of situation. Maybe you think there's more, maybe you think there's less, I don't know. In any event, this is sort of the picture with those things in mind. Now, pre-CWELCC, much of the system was private. Right, much of the system was private. We look particularly at Alberta, British Columbia, New Brunswick, Newfoundland. These sort of darkish blue lines, that is private. So, we're in the 80% range, private provision of spaces in non-school age for those provinces. Other provinces like Saskatchewan and Manitoba, almost entirely nonprofit. This is the sort of light blue bars here, almost entirely nonprofit. And places like Ontario and Quebec, fairly even, with some provision for homes there as well, where you've got roughly half and half in Ontario, sort of half nonprofit, half private, with some homes in the middle, and sort of a bit of a mix across some of the other provinces. Now, obviously, if you're mostly nonprofit to begin with, it's easier to expand in nonprofit, and if you're mostly private to begin with, it's going to be a lot harder to expand in nonprofit. And of course, this is the foundation of the CWELCC agreements. In every single one of the agreements, in all the government communications about this, who is driving the expansion? Nonprofit. Now, the question is that actually what happened? We're halfway through, and so we can see whether that is in fact what happened or not. And this is the expansion by auspice since 2022. So where have new spaces net been created since 2022 by province? And you can see this sort of, I don't know what color that is, brownish, say. You can see this brownish color, this is private. This is private. So places like Alberta, BC, PEI, New Brunswick, the expansion, the new spaces created since 2022 are private, overwhelmingly in these provinces. When we get to the other end, we see the nonprofit, which is the green, becoming an important driver in Manitoba, for instance, Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia. We'll see why in another slide or two, as well as Newfoundland. The picture is a bit more mixed in places like Ontario. Now, Quebec didn't sign up to the CWELCC agreements, but it doesn't matter. We're tracking the data anyway, and you can see the space creation since then has been relatively even. In some provinces, a lot of weight was put on homes to fill the gap. Is that actually what happened? It is in Saskatchewan, but not really anyplace else. So the new spaces were, there was a big flood of new spaces in Saskatchewan. In British Columbia, you actually see a reduction in the overall number of licenses for homes. It isn't because homes closed per se, but it's because homes converted their licenses from a family or in-home multi-age to a center license of multi-age. So basically the sites still exist, they changed the definition of the license, and that's why you see this negative number here. So in the aggregate, across the country, what has been the space creation since 2022 under CWELCC? This is the breakdown. All the provinces, all combined. 2/3 of this was private. This is a private expansion. CWELCC is it's going to be public, it's going to be nonprofit. It has not been. This is overwhelmingly a private expansion. About 55,000 new spaces created in private centers. Now, it's not to say that nonprofits aren't expanding. They are. They make up about 1/3 of the expansion, about 30,000 spaces. And the difference here is this isn't the count of homes. This is the number of spaces in homes at 4 spaces per house of about 6,000. They make up the difference. But you can see that CWELCC is a private sector program in terms of its expansion so far. And this is updated as of 2 months ago. So I think it's worth taking a look now at a little more detail on some of the detailed nature of chains versus individuals. So who's expanding? Here we've got the brown here. This is private, largely individual centers. So this is not chains. So these are private centers owned by a person. Maybe they have 1 or 2 sites under or equal to 3 sites. So those are kind of individuals, and then chains have more than 3 sites. And so you can see, particularly in places like Alberta or BC, this has been primarily an expansion on the private sector side, to be sure, but private sector individuals or very small chains, as opposed to large chains, of which I think there's a lot of concern. The orange here is private chains. And you can see certainly in places like PEI, and this isn't a big expansion, but maybe British Columbia is a better example. The private chains have been part of that, but they aren't the whole picture in terms of the expansion since 2022. The green here is nonprofit chains. In Newfoundland and Nova Scotia, we'll talk about why that is in the next slide. And then the blue is nonprofit, but individuals. So this is going to be a 1 or 2 off parent-run nonprofit or something like that. But you can see that largely it's been expansion of private sector, small or single chains in essence. Now, if we compare the chains themselves, nonprofit versus private chains, this is the picture. And we can see it's actually relatively even, all things considered, across the country in many of the provinces. So the orange here, this is private chains. The number, this is how much they've expanded private chains. And the green is public chains. How much have they expanded over this period? We've kicked out homes, we've kicked out individuals. We're only looking at chains here. And you can see that in most of the big provinces, it's relatively even. So nonprofits, despite this being a nonprofit, public-led, public system of CWELCC, in terms of chains, we're not seeing the nonprofits even outperform the for-profits or the private rather. And in Alberta, they got utterly crushed. So if we look at chains only in Alberta, the private sector chains are dramatically outperforming the nonprofit chains in terms of expansion since 2022. Now, we do have some cases where the nonprofit chains have seen huge expansion, and they are on the East Coast, particularly Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. Newfoundland is entirely due to the pre-K program. So the pre-K program was it's a pre-kindergarten program. It's kind of a specialized part of childcare. It was a contract awarded to the YMCA's, and it's one of the reasons why we see this massive expansion in nonprofit chain. That nonprofit chain is the YMCA. That's what's driving this. In Nova Scotia, there wasn't the same kind of structured approach to expansion of nonprofit chains. This is almost entirely due to YMCA's expanding aggressively in Nova Scotia. But in most of the other provinces, you see fairly even performance, honestly, between the nonprofits and for-profit chains. Now, what about the geography? Where are these spaces going? Are they all going, where they're needed most, in childcare deserts, where there is no childcare? Or are they just going into big cities? Well, here we're looking at the geography of the expansion. So where are the new spaces going, 2022 to 2025, over this sort of CWELCC period? And we can see that certainly in places like British Columbia, Nova Scotia, Ontario, and Alberta, more than half of the spaces are being located in big cities. So this is the sort of orange color here. But in other areas, like Quebec, for instance, many of the new spaces are being created outside of big cities, in smaller towns, in more rural areas. And so, this is somewhat even in future research on a paper I'm going to work on this. I'll look in much more detail at how the picture of childcare deserts at the postal code level has changed. But fundamentally, the problem is this isn't a planned expansion, right? We're not saying, look, there's a desert here. You can't get a license until your childcare center goes right here in this desert. That's not how this is being planned. This is being planned by providers that are deciding, I would like to put a center here, and I would like to get a license, and here's your license, and you can go ahead and build it. Now, maybe those providers are interested in filling in childcare deserts, and maybe they're not. This is not a planned system that will for sure guarantee that everyone gets 60% coverage rate in every postal code across the country, and I think that we'll see that once I look in more detail at some of those childcare deserts. So, to wrap up, the public concerns, parental concerns about childcare. They don't know the detail. They don't know the gritty detail about this program and that program and how you get in this and how you get that. Fees are high, wait lists are long. I think on the fees front, fees have dropped rapidly. They aren't at $10 a day. In several provinces, they won't be at $10 a day at the end of next year, I suspect. I think that we'll end up with an average of $10 a day sort of approach. But in many provinces, they are at $10 a day. But irrespective of that entire discussion, it is a huge savings for parents. It is much more affordable today than it was in 2019, which is the base year for this comparison. When it comes to, I think, moving to set fees as opposed to having market fees, I think this is an important change, that even if those set fees are still higher than $10 a day, like they are in Ontario or like they are in Alberta, it sets up a formulary for paying, a cost-based formula for paying for childcare costs, which I think in the long run is a very important approach. And we still see two provinces that retain a market structure. So you have a market fee, it's different in every center, and then you subtract a set amount, and then you get the fee that you effectively pay in British Columbia and Nova Scotia. Hopefully we'll see some movement towards a set fee system, even if it's more than $10 a day in those provinces in the coming year. The savings are real for parents, and they are huge. They're particularly big in the GTA, in the north, as well as in places like Calgary. But parents have short memories. And they haven't been in the system for 6 years. They've been in the system for 4 years, and they probably haven't experienced those fees as they existed in 2019. And so they don't see the savings, even though the savings, they pay a lot more. In terms of the space expansion, we are on track to hit the CWELCC targets, but they aren't good targets. So, I guess that's good news. But the trouble, I think, in the end is that coverage rates, particularly in Alberta and Ontario, will fall well short of the 59% goal in some of the agreements. Now, of course, Alberta and Ontario didn't sign up to the 59% goal, so I'm just kind of applying that to them, but they are not going to hit those targets. The space creation is in many provinces, largely in big cities. The expansion has been almost entirely private sector. It has not been public. And so if we want it to be public, if we want to address childcare deserts, we need to make changes. Those changes need to be made now. We have a new federal government that, I don't know if they're interested in making those changes. But those need to be made now. Otherwise, I think it will continue on trend, and we will see the CWELCC expansion be an almost entirely private affair, largely driven by the needs of providers, not by the needs of parents. So with that, I'd like to wrap it up, and thanks so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, David. If anyone wants to connect with David during the break, Please do so. Thank you so much for such a great talk.